Let's talk about boobs in video games.
I'm listening.
So, I have an opinion that may or may not be controversial. I actually don't have a problem with big boobs in video games,
Take that back!
as long as certain criteria are met. A little while ago, I was playing an MMO called Swords of Legends Online. MMOs are arguably some of the most personal types of video games because one of the first things players do is create their own character, and often people want their characters to look like them. For example, when I create a character, they almost always have long black hair, angled almond eyes, stuff like that. I was able to add all of these characteristics to Solo, including some puffier cheeks to match my own chipmunk cheeks. But when it came to choosing my body type, I was quite distressed that there were no boob sliders. Unlike other genres of games that have a set cast of characters that are pre-designed and stories that can be completed in a certain number of hours, MMOs have a more powerful roleplay element with thousands of hours of content. So we end up spending so much time on these characters. It makes logical sense to give players more customization options because having a personal connection to a character makes for better player retention, which also translates to more revenue for studios. So why are so many games still missing boob sliders? It could be because there was never a real obvious need for them. The digital gaming industry as a whole is actually not that old. At least in America, the first digital game came out in the late 1970s with the creation of arcade titles like Pong, which was a table tennis game with no human characters, so obviously no boobs there. It wasn't until the early 80s with the release of Ladybug and Mrs. Pac-Man were distinct female characters introduced for the first time in the form of a sphere with eyelashes. After that, several titles would go on to include playable female characters, with one noteworthy entry being Tobi Kissy Masuyo from the arcade shooter Baraduke in 1985. She's described as the first empowered, non-sexualized female video game protagonist. Her gender apparently wasn't even revealed until the ending of the game, so it's not like players could really tell from her physical form that she was a woman. Then 1992 comes around and Fatal Fury 2 enters the chat. This fighting game had a character named Mai Shiranui, the first character in a video game with boobs that moved on their own, independent of her character model. And this ended up inspiring numerous other titles to take, shall we say, artistic liberties with the physical representation of the female form. Now, if we're going to talk about the history of boobs in video games, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Lara Croft, the protagonist from the 1996 release of Tomb Raider and her infamous triangular pixelated memories. She is a bit of a controversial figure due to her sex appeal, but she is also cited as an empowering figure for female gamers because she friggin' kicks ass. Her boobs were very obvious, but they also stayed in place. Unlike this. This is not a thing in real life. Yes, boobs move, they swing, they bounce, but this looks like they have their own gravitational field just pulling us in. I can't look away. Boobs don't move like this in real life. For those who are unfamiliar, the Earth has this force called gravity, which exerts a downward pull on our bodies. So boobs don't just flop about for no apparent reason. These boobs be like... There's also this other thing called Newton's laws of motion, which includes the principle that an object will not change its motion unless a force acts on it. So what is the applied force here? Is it wind? Is it exceptionally targeted wind? Because her hair isn't flying all over the place, but her boobs are moving like those, air tube dancer things you see at gas stations. Is it the intensity of my gaze, which, by the way, not a real force? I don't care how much smolder you have.
You broke my smolder.
Like, they shouldn't be water balloons 1 second and then helium balloons the next.
One eternity later.
Many of these games have magic and dragons and other fantastical elements. I can suspend a bit of realism to a certain degree. Games that feature conventionally attractive, big-busted female characters are very much designed for the male gaze. For anyone unfamiliar, the male gaze is a way of looking at and being seen in the world that empowers men and sexualizes women. The classic example of this is Megan Fox in Transformers, when she's fixing a car and a camera pans slowly over her body so the viewer can admire her form. Many of these female characters in games were created by straight men in a way that objectifies women, and there are several reasons for why this is. For example, sex sells, perhaps there aren't as many female game developers, etc. But the concern with these types of portrayals is that they can create unrealistic expectations for women's bodies. These bodies simply do not exist naturally in nature, and it can contribute to body image issues for girls, and even if they did exist, it would cause massive spine issues and pain for women to be holding that much weight on their chests. And what about my ladies who have smaller chest sizes? They're beautiful too. According to a 2022 study by research firm Newzoo, nearly half of all gamers are women, so there is a giant sector of players that are arguably underserved in this market where boob depictions are concerned. Makeup brands are releasing more shade ranges to encompass a greater variety of skin colors. Fashion companies are including more diverse models and body sizes in their marketing campaigns. So I think it's high time video games did the same. Some already are. For example, Square Enix decided to reduce the size of Tifa Lockhart's bust in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. But for the most part, female forms in video games are still the typical hourglass shape. And I would personally love to see a greater range of body types to better mirror the diversity of people in real life. But going back to MMOs, it's high time that boob sliders became as standard as choosing your hair color. We should be able to adjust the size of our characters' busts as we so choose. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would devs waste valuable resources on implementing boob sliders when the natural assumption is many players will simply pick the biggest size? I mean, look at how popular Lady Dimitrescu was in Resident Evil Village. She's like 9 feet tall with anatomically proportionate boobs to match, literally the size of my head. And I don't have an issue with this because Lady Dimitrescu's character was extremely well done. Her boobs weren't her defining character trait. She had real motivations, a complete backstory, and a compelling personality. I adore her aesthetic, basketball boobs and all. Since we can already adjust the sizes of other things in MMOs like cheeks and waists, I'm not entirely convinced it would be really that big of a time sink to create various sizes of the chest area. Using my favorite MMO as an example, Guild Wars 2 was released in 2012, and despite being a decade old, it already has a decent amount of boob size options. Unfortunately, they're locked to specific body types, which are all generally conventional hourglass shapes, so it doesn't quite allow players to mix and match. But the options do beat out some more recent MMO releases. For example, Lost Ark was originally released in South Korea in 2019 and recently launched in the West in 2022, but it has only one body type. Conversely, BDO, which was released in 2014, has one of the most robust character customizations ever, where you can adjust not only boob size, but your character's entire muscle structure. This should be the norm in MMOs. It's mind-boggling to me that these older games are beating out newer titles in body diversity. To be clear, I'm fine with big boobs in video games. I can admire the aesthetics and artistic liberties developers take, but I do have 3 caveats. 1, the female character needs to be fully fleshed out and not just there for eye candy. 2, players should have the option to adjust the boob sizes of their character. And 3, if big boobs and incorrect physics are absolutely necessary for the narrative and gameplay direction of a video game, then they should put some sort of debuff on enemies. Like maybe a condition called distraction, which causes a 20% chance to fumble your next attack. In all seriousness, boobs come in all shapes and sizes, and more customization options and greater inclusivity in video games can only be a good thing, especially in an MMO where the RPG element is one of the primary selling points of the genre. I want to see a greater range of bodies in video games so that female characters can be elevated beyond the role of visual appeal. In my opinion, it's always good to see female characters in games that are well written, where boob size isn't their main character trait. With that being said, let me know what you guys think about this topic. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be honored if you hit that like button so that other people can watch as well. And you can also check me out on Twitch at EmpressXV and on other socials too. Till the next one, bye!